Well, one specific thing, two broad themes. First, I think he's put Israel on the chopping block. I don't think there's ever been a speech by an American president, let alone one at the United Nations, that was so critical of Israel. Second, reinforcing what Bill said, there's a lot about the personality of Barack Obama and what he's done in the last months. He did everything but say, "I'm not George Bush." Well, I think most people realize that. And finally, the naivete, the Wilsonianism of the speech. He did everything but say, "Can't we all just get along?" I thought it was a remarkable speech, a real window into Barack Obama's mentality, and one that was warmly received by the members of the UN for exactly that reason.
Picking up on your point about Israel, one of the times they actually burst into applause during the middle of the president's remarks was when he said, and I quote, "America does not accept the legitimacy of continued Israeli settlements." A point which went over very well with those in attendance at the UN. But I want to switch your focus right now to Iran, Ambassador, because the president did mention Iran by name and said that they and North Korea must be held accountable, and then said the following. Take a listen. I'll get your reaction.
The world must stand together to demonstrate that international law is not an empty promise and that treaties will be enforced. We must insist that the future does not belong to fear.
Does that advance the ball?
Well, I don't think so. I think that is exactly the problem that the Security Council of the United Nations has not been able to address effectively with respect to Iran and North Korea's proliferation activities. So to me, that was a real example, citing international law of all things, of how the UN has failed in the past. And I think really what the president's hoping for is that because he is Barack Obama, he asked explicitly for the other nations to join with him. I don't think that's going to change anything, but that reflects the very basic view that his accession to the presidency alone changes America's perception in the world and therefore should change others' policies. Well, it hasn't happened in 8 months. We'll see what happens now.
And we heard a lot of that as we watched video of the moments we just saw on screen, right? We heard a lot of that, Ambassador. I thought one interesting part of the speech was its beginnings, where he said, I've only been in office for 9 months. I'm well aware of the expectations that accompany my presidency. They're not about me, but they're rooted in a discontent with the status quo that has allowed us to be increasingly defined by our differences. He says, I took office when many around the world had come to view America with skepticism and distrust. Part of it was due to opposition to specific policies, a belief that America has acted unilaterally without regard for interests of others. This has fed an almost reflexive anti-Americanism. And he went on from there. How did that strike you?
Well, I have never seen an American president give a speech at the United Nations that spent so much time contrasting his administration with the previous administration. Obviously, a president talks about his own policies and how he sees America's role in the world, but this was a speech almost more designed for an American audience than an international audience. Again, playing on that aspect, or hoping to play on that aspect, that he is not George Bush. And I just was struck by how personal it was, and I must say how unpresidential.
Well, he went on from there, because that was how he opened the speech, and then right before he ended it, Ambassador, he sort of went back to the point and said, it would appear to be a reference to the prior administration, saying, quote, democracy cannot be imposed on any nation from the outside. Each society must search for its own path, and no path is perfect. Each country will pursue a path rooted in the culture of its people, in its past. America has too often been selective in its promotion of democracy. I mean, that seems to be a clear reference to the prior administration. Is that, in your experience, par for the course? Frankly, I don't remember whether President Bush made such references or not.
Not to prior administrations. I mean, as I say, a president obviously is going to advocate his own policies, but these repeated efforts by the president in this speech to say implicitly, I am not George Bush, I think is unprecedented, and I think it's carrying an American political debate, which is legitimate to have, into the international arena, and that is particularly what I find unpresidential.